What is morality? For many people, morality is based on authority. To be moral is to obey the rules set down by church or parents or society. Some religions have said that morality is doing what God commands. Priests or pastors can tell people what that is. The moral person follows their guidance. The 18th century has been called the Age of Enlightenment. Thinkers declared that humanity had now reached maturity. People should no longer look to others to tell them how to act. They should decide for themselves what morality demands. The great Enlightenment philosopher Immanuel Kant became a leader of this movement. He urged each person to depend on himself, to look to the light of his own reason to discover what morality means. Immanuel Kant was born on April 22, 1724, the son of a saddler. His father worked hard to support a family of 10 children. Somehow, he sent Immanuel through a full education at a local school and university. After his father's death, Immanuel supported himself as a private tutor, then as a university lecturer. He was a popular teacher, known for including humor and stories in his lectures. He described his goal as stimulating students to stand on their own feet. The young Kant had a second source of income, winning at billiards. The game was his greatest pleasure, other than study. In his whole life, Kant never traveled more than 10 miles from the town where he was born, Königsberg, a provincial seaport in East Prussia. Still, he kept in close touch with intellectual developments throughout Europe. The Enlightenment was a time of growing confidence that humans could unlock the secrets of the universe. Commercial fleets brought home goods and information from around the world. Kant himself studied and taught a wide variety of subjects, including not only philosophy, but also physics, mathematics, anthropology, mineralogy, and one of his favorite subjects, geography. He also loved to talk.
I think Kant was someone who had guests every evening. He invited all great people, not only from Königsberg, but also from, well, the whole of Europe. Of course, so far as they were a little worthwhile to have a conversation with. Those people he invited into his home, so he did not have his dinner alone. He talked to those people. So he was someone who, by way of witnesses, learned what happened, knew beforehand what was happening in Europe.
Throughout his life, Kant suffered from poor health. When he was about 30, doctors predicted that he had only 3 years to live. Fortunately, he proved them wrong. He maintained his health through rigorous self-discipline. His daily regimen included a long afternoon walk. One can picture him, over months, years, and decades of such walks, gradually thinking through how to reconcile the scientific view of a mechanical universe in which everything is determined, and his own deep conviction that humans have moral freedom. Each day, Kant's walks were so punctual that the housewives of Königsberg set their clocks by when he passed. Kant was deeply interested in science. He particularly admired Sir Isaac Newton, who had tried to formulate the laws of motion that govern everything in the physical universe.
One can even see Immanuel Kant's motivation as having been very largely oriented around the question, look what Newton did. He showed us what must be the essential structure of nature. His feeling is that Newton has succeeded in doing this, and therefore his task is to show how other kinds of knowledge can conform to the structures that Newton has laid down for us.
But there's another side to Kant's thinking. He had been raised in the Lutheran pietist tradition and maintained a firm belief in God and the demands of morality. But how can religion and morality make sense in Newton's mechanical universe? Kant argued that we cannot prove the existence of God by reason, yet reason can show that it is reasonable to accept God on faith. Reason can also show that morality is not just an illusion. Newton's laws might govern the world we see around us, but through morality, we have access to a world that is not governed by Newton's laws.
Kant makes this distinction in his first critique between the phenomenal world, the world of appearances, this is roughly the nature, the world of objects in space and time, and a noumenal world which somehow stands behind this and supports it, but which is unknown.
And when we look at an individual as part of the phenomenal realm, we look at the individual as subject to natural laws, as part of nature. When we look at someone from the perspective of the noumenal realm, we look at the individual as having reasons for action and as being capable of stepping back from his or her actual desires and subjecting those desires to critical evaluation and acting according to some sort of higher level principles of critical evaluation.
Kant claimed that we experience morality as a conflict. Our moral duty pulls us in one direction, while our bodily desires and self-interest pull us in another. But humans are able to rise above their bodily desires and self-interest. They are able to act according to reason. Kant calls this ability our freedom or autonomy.
So Kant resists in advance against an authoritarian form of ethics. For example, ethics that tell you something should be done because it is commanded by, for example, the state or God or something. Those ethics are all non-autonomous. So Kant in general opposes non-autonomous ethics. That is, an ethics in which people don't give the law to themselves, but it is given by other authorities.
For Kant, moral right and wrong do not depend on the exterior consequences of our actions or on achieving happiness. Instead, right and wrong depend on the interior choices of reason. Moral goodness lies inside us, in our will, the ability of our reason to choose for itself. In Kant's words,
"It is impossible to think of anything in the universe, or even beyond it, that is good without qualification, except a good will. A good will is good not because of the actions it carries out, or the effects it brings about, nor does goodness depend on its ability to achieve certain results. A good will is good simply in virtue of its willing. That is, its goodness lies in itself."
For Kant, to act according to reason is to act as we believe all humans should act. It is to follow rules we believe it is everyone's duty to follow. Kant laid out his ideas on ethics in a short book, The Groundwork of the Metaphysics of Morals. Here he introduces some new terms. A maxim, he says, is a rule that one person follows. A universal law is a rule that applies to everyone. Kant summarizes his ethics in a principle he calls the categorical imperative.
Act only on those maxims that you would be willing to have become universal laws.
The categorical imperative is forbiddingly abstract when you first hear it. The maxim of your act is just the rule that you would be following if you did a certain thing. Now, suppose I'm thinking about lying. I ask myself, would I be willing to have people follow the rule that I would be following all the time? What rule would I be following? If I'm lying because there's some advantage in it to me, maybe the rule would be tell the truth except when there's some advantage in it to you, and then you can lie. Would I be willing to have everyone do that all the time? Well, imagine what that would be like. It would be a situation in which you could never rely on what other people would say. So as a reasonable person, I couldn't want other people to follow the rule that I would be following, so I can't follow it myself. That's essentially what the categorical imperative requires.
One way to interpret that is like the golden rule. You should do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Or more normatively, it is right for you to act towards somebody else only if it would be right for them to do that to you if the situation were reversed. And that part of Kant's theory seems very plausible and may be one of these things that all moral views should accept.
But if Kant's categorical imperative is like the golden rule, or even like the playground lesson that it's bad to do things to other people that you wouldn't want, say, a bigger kid to do to you, then what makes the categorical imperative different or special?
Das Neue an Kants kategorischer Imperativ und an Kants Moralphilosophie ist im Kern eigentlich nur, dass sagt, wir brauchen keine außermenschliche
What was new about Kant's categorical imperative and Kant's moral philosophy is actually in essence only that he says that we don't need a superhuman authority to find morality.
Unsere eigene Vernunft belehrt uns darüber.
We just need our own reason. Our reason teaches us what we have to do. This self-imposed morality, which is called the autonomous morality, needs a broad understanding of human beings.
Dazu muss man aber einen weiten Begriff auch des Menschen haben.
Another example Kant gives is false promising. Suppose a man needs to borrow money. He knows no one will lend it to him unless he promises to pay it back. But suppose he also knows he won't be able to pay it back. What should he do? Should he promise to pay back the debt even though he knows he won't? Then the maxim he is acting on would be, if you need a loan, promise to repay it even though you know you won't. Could this maxim be a universal law, something everyone can do? Clearly not. Such a rule would undermine itself. People would soon learn they can't believe such promises, and eventually, promising would end. In Kant, then, the moral life is based on the same principles that we believe everyone else should live by. Reason requires consistency, and consistency means living by the same rules we think others should follow.
The strength of Kantian ethics is that it appeals to a lot of intuitions that most well-brought-up people in our culture have. And these include the notion that the heart of immorality typically is to treat yourself as an exception, to do something that you wouldn't want other people to do. There's also something that is built into modern Western culture, perhaps because of our interest in law and also the parallels with the kind of science that developed from the work of Sir Isaac Newton in the 17th century. We think of ethics as involved with principle. And typically when somebody's thought to be a really good person, we say something like, well, she's a woman of principle, or he's a man of principle. And Kant really captures those intuitions. Those are very strong points of his theory.
Kant sought to apply the categorical imperative to situations that mant people might not think of as moral. He calls up the image of a person who lets his talents rust and devotes his life to idleness and pleasure.
Kant says that in order to figure out whether our behaviors are moral or immoral, we need to ask ourselves, would I be willing to have everyone do this? So the vagabond needs to ask himself, would he be willing to have everyone do what he proposes to do? The answer to that probably is no. He would not want everyone to take off as he's doing. Otherwise, who's he going to live off of? There's a contradiction between what he is choosing for himself and what he wants or is willing to have others do. And because of that contradiction, Kant says, this kind of behavior is wrong. It might be all right for the vagabond to take off for a while, to do it for a year maybe, but you cannot simply opt out of society, opt out of your duties, because not everyone could do that, and so it's wrong for you to do.
Kant suggests that treating everyone the same implies that everyone has an equal worth or dignity. He connects this ideal of human dignity to a second and very different formulation of the categorical imperative.
What does dignity mean for Kant? To say that a person has dignity is to say that they're able to choose for themselves what purposes they will follow in lives, what values they will adopt, what they will do.
One of the most puzzling things about Kant's ethics is that he offers more than one formulation of the categorical imperative. The official version of the categorical imperative is that you should act on the maxims that you would be willing to have become universal laws, or act only on such maxims. But then a few pages later, he repeats the categorical imperative, and suddenly it has a very different form.
Act in such a way that you never use human beings, yourself or others, only as means, but always treat them as ends.
What does that mean, concretely? Well, it means that I should, first of all, value your interests as important in themselves, so that I don't want to do anything that would be harmful to you. I want to do only things that will be helpful to you. But in addition to that, I have to consider that you are a person with your own judgments about what's good for you and what's harmful to you. And that's something that I should respect too.
And that means that we should treat people as they consent to be treated. So that always in any moral situation, one important moral factor is how is my activity impacting on the ability of these people to consent to what I am doing.
If I make all the judgments about what's good for you and act accordingly, I'm treating you as a kind of object. I'm not taking into account that you are a subject. You are a person with your own ideas and your own judgments, just as I have my ideas and judgments.
Kant's two versions of the categorical imperative sound very different, yet they are closely connected to the same social ideal from the Enlightenment. This is the idea that we all belong to a community of free and equal persons.
What he's trying to get us to understand is that what's at issue when we talk about ethics is, as he puts it himself, a matter of acting always and deciding how to act always in a way that in a way that involves treating yourself as just one fellow citizen with all the other fellow citizens in the Commonwealth, when what he calls the Commonwealth of ends, that every human being is an end in him or herself, and we have to live together in this kind of moral democracy.
Kant's ethical theories have been criticized from various directions. Some have questioned whether people are truly free to act contrary to their desires and self-interest. Others have observed that real situations are complex and can make it all but impossible to define what maxim a person may be acting on. Some have called Kant's notion of a reasoning being who is independent of everyone an atomistic view of the self, a fiction. Real selves are always shaped by social circumstances. Others have doubted whether people who would be widely recognized as moral are indeed acting from a sense of duty.
If you think of a moral person and he acts kindly towards other people, I think normally we would think he's doing it because he feels some concern for them. It's not that he thinks this is my duty and I should do that because it's my duty. So in that sense, Kant's picture of moral motivation does not seem to fit actual human motivation.
Philosophers who see morality as based on the quest for a good life have criticized Kant for divorcing morality from the pursuit of happiness.
The problem, it seems to me, is this unrelenting opposition of morality to happiness, which leads morality to be seen as not just demanding, but in a sense as, well, perhaps not exactly punitive, but as always likely to be punitive, as something that we should shape up to and do, even if it's against our interests and even if we lose all our happiness in doing so.
But perhaps the most basic criticism of Kant has been stirred by his view that we should act only on principle, regardless of consequences. Kant's disregard for consequences is particularly glaring in an example that he himself provides about lying. Suppose someone is being pursued by a murderer, and you know where the person's hiding. The murderer comes up to you and asks if you know where that person is. You believe that if you tell the truth, the murderer will find his victim and kill him. Should you tell the truth or lie? Kant would have you reason as follows. You should act only on that maxim or rule that you can will to become a universal law. You can't be willing for it to be all right for everyone to lie. Therefore, you should not lie to the murderer, even to save the victim.
It is tempting to allow exceptions to the rule against lying, because in some cases we think that the consequences of honesty are bad and the consequences of lying may be good. But we can never know for sure what the consequences will be. We cannot know that a good result will ensue. The result of lying could unexpectedly turn out to be bad. It is therefore always best to avoid the evil you know, lying, and leave the consequences for what they are. Even if the consequences were to be bad, they would not be our fault, because we have done our duty.
There are various ways to hedge Kant's position. You could say, for instance, Well, let's make the maxim, never lie except to save a life. But the fact that Kant framed the example in the way he did suggests that we should take him at his word. For Kant, duty was preeminent. Consequences should not figure into decisions. And for Kant, the person who chose not to tell a lie would be morally innocent, indeed commendable, free of the dreadful responsibility that most people would place on him.
According to Kant, those rules don't clash. That is almost his ultra-optimism, the conviction that it is possible to systematize moral action so that no conflict will occur between different rules. That is a kind of starting point of that theory, with which I have great difficulties myself, just because it denies the existence of dilemmas. So I think that Kant is much too optimistic, that the moral world is much more difficult than you would expect or hope on the basis of such a test.
Kant thought there were no genuine moral dilemmas. I think that was a mistake in his theory, and I think that he probably could have changed his view on that point without changing a lot of the rest of the theory. So I think there could be a Kantian theory that does recognize moral dilemmas, but Kant's own theory didn't.
Indeed, Kant's ethical ideas have been adapted and modified by many later philosophers. His ideas about moral autonomy and human dignity, the importance of consent and not making an exception of yourself in any ethical dealing, remain extremely influential today. That Kant did not die young may be the most important non-event in modern philosophy. Starting in his mid-50s and continuing until his death at age 79, he turned out books which set new directions for virtually every branch of philosophy. In the closing passage from The Critique of Practical Reason, the young admirer of Newton and the much older ethicist seem to speak together.
Two things move the mind with ever-increasing admiration and awe, the more often and more steadily we reflect on them: the starry heavens above and the moral law within.
The Examined Life is a 26-part series for college credit. To purchase a video cassette or transcript of this program, call 626-796-7300 or visit us online. Please order by program number.